All right, 4.5 minutes after 11 o'clock. Looks like it wants to rain out there. I have another great author to talk with us about his amazing book. It's called The Da Vinci Legacy. The Da Vinci Code book was such an interesting concept, and then it turned out to be all fiction, right? Jean-Pierre Isbouts, this is different. He's an art historian. He's a doctoral professor at Fielding Graduate University. He directed several programs for Disney, ABC, Hallmark, the History Channel. He produced recordings with orchestras around the world, and he's a best-selling author. This one is The Da Vinci Legacy, How an Elusive 16th Century Artist Became a Global Pop Icon. There's so much in this book that I never knew about Leonardo da Vinci, and in my, limited understanding of Leonardo da Vinci, I'm always fascinated by the fact that this guy has held our fascination. In a world where we have photography, sometimes we're not as impressed by artwork that looks, almost photographic. But trust me, it was an amazing thing for his time. Jean-Pierre Isbouts, good morning, sir. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Larry.
Where are you? Where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Santa Monica, California, where the sky is overcast.
It's just like here. I love Santa Monica, by the way. So tell me about this. We focus on a few names in the history of art, and I'm always wondering, is that because only a few of them were really good? Were there many, many unknown artists who were really good?
Oh, that's a very good question, and you're absolutely right. There are many artists who emerged from the Gothic era to really embrace the Renaissance, which is to really look at the earth and to depict people from a realistic point of view, from a naturalistic point of view, to really show them what they are like, rather than according to traditional iconographic conventions, from the Middle Ages. And Leonardo codified that. He, as you said, he was the first to depict a person with photographic realism, and he did that with a bag of tricks that he himself had developed based on his own observations of science and nature and anatomy and other things. So I think that's why we're so fascinated with this character.
So the bag of tricks that you referred to, are you familiar with a film that I believe Penn and Teller actually were the executive producers of in some way, which showed a device that might have been used, almost like a projector of some sort?
A camera obscura. Yeah, there's definitely an indication that Leonardo was familiar with a camera obscura, which basically is a box with a lens that projects an image on a flat surface, and then you can really analyze it and help in the translation of a three-dimensional view, like a landscape or a city, onto a flat surface. But Leonardo was different from everyone else because he was not educated. People often forget that. He was a natural child. We don't call it a bastard child anymore. We call it a natural child.
Oh, okay.
The outcome of he was the result of a roll in the hay between a young notary, Ser Piero, and a very nice, beautiful farm maid. But of course, marriage out of the question. I mean, Ser Piero was in a different social layer altogether, and his parents said, "Absolutely not. You're marrying the daughter of this, very prominent family in Florence." So Leonardo was raised by his mother, Caterina, and what happened is she married a bricklayer, and after a few years, the bricklayer says, "I don't want this kid in my house. I mean, it's not my son. Get him out of here." So at age 5, Leonardo was taken away from his mother. And I think that was a very traumatic experience, which explains a lot what happened with his art in later years.
Now, in today's world, an artist might develop in the following way. A child is sitting in kindergarten with a pencil and a crayon, and the teacher says, "Hey, that's pretty good. We need to make sure you get art class." Or we focus on what you're doing. Was he, as a young child, was he doodling, and did he get the attention of the adults?
That's exactly what happened, Larry. He was doodling away, particularly some of the landscapes around Florence. And your listeners, maybe they have been to Tuscany, they know how beautiful it is. And his father, Ser Piero, who would come once in a while and check on his son, he said, "You know what, I'm going to take him to the studio of Andrea del Verrocchio, who was the leading business, in Florence at the time." And that's where Leonardo was enrolled at a young age, and that's where he learned to read, to write, to grind pigments. There weren't paint tubes in those days. You had to actually make the paint and mix it with oil or with tempera, with egg yolk, to learn to prime a panel and simply, learn how to become an artist. So that was a very, very useful experience for him.
What is your theory as to why we place almost holy respect, I guess, to when he does a painting of the Last Supper, or he does a painting of Jesus? What was the one that sold for so much money? Salvador, what was it called?
Salvador Mundi.
Yeah.
Salvador Mundi.
So
yeah.
we look at the picture and we hold it in reverence, almost as if it is Christ himself and not a painting of Christ.
That's true. That's true. It's that mystique of Da Vinci, and that's what my co-writer Chris Brown and I were trying to figure out. Because when Leonardo died, exactly 500 years ago, he was forgotten. He was in exile in France. The French King Francois I had given him a little house where he could retire because nobody in Italy wanted him. He'd been at the papal court in Rome, which was then the center of the Renaissance, but the Pope didn't want to give him any business. Everything went to Raphael, Michelangelo. These were the big stars of the moment. So Leonardo was all but forgotten. And so the question we asked is, how did this man, who should have faded from the pages of history, become this big icon he is today, the top-selling artist? And that's what we're trying to figure out with this book, The Da Vinci Legacy. And we found out that it had actually very little to do with art. It had to do with the new mass medium, the printed press and copper engravings. It had to do with political movements, and it had to do with social movements, that people were slowly changing the way they looked at art. And of course, our own age is fascinated with Leonardo because we're fascinated with STEM, with science, technology, engineering, mathematics. Well, that's what Leonardo did very well.
Yeah, and talk about that part of his legacy. He obviously left some drawings that seem to indicate that he had an understanding of flight.
That's right. He was fascinated by the flight of birds, and he wanted to figure out how the heck do they do that. Here's an object heavier than air, and yet these animals go up and they fly around. And he built what he believed was a glider, and people have tried to build it and reconstruct it, and of course the thing collapsed because what Leonardo never figured out is that the secret of flight is that air must move faster underneath a wing than above a wing, and that's how you create a foil, that's how you create air. But he did lots of other things. He developed a parachute, he developed a tank, he developed a bicycle, So he was the fact that he was not educated worked in his favor because he could look at nature and natural phenomena with an open mind and figure out things that other people didn't because they were basically held back by formal knowledge.
Talk about the fascination with paintings under paintings. We have every once in a while a news story about a new X-ray reveals whatever was under Mona Lisa, etc. What is the truth about that? You hear these theories that he just couldn't afford another canvas, so he just painted over it. Is that true?
Well, it's true that wood panels, were a lot more expensive than canvas. Canvas was a very new concept, new support, we call it, in those days. In fact, right now a movie is airing on PBS stations based on our book, which shows how canvas really revolutionized art in those days. And yes, in fact, we just conducted a multispectral study of a painting in Belgium, which we believe is a second version of Leonardo's Last Supper, painted by his workshop. And what that does is multispectral scanning allows you to look underneath the paint layer. So you can look at things that the human eye cannot see. And so, for example, in this case, we were able to identify the underlying underdrawing, which we believe are the same cartoons, the same studies that he used for the original fresco of the Last Supper in Milan.
The fascination with the Mona Lisa.
Yes.
I've always been curious about the background in the Mona Lisa more than I have about the woman in the picture herself. What's going on in the background there in that picture?
Well, that's a very good question. And books have been written about it. And in fact, I'm now involved in a new study. I just came back from Milan 3 days ago, and we've been trekking through the mountains north of Milan, which of course are the foothills of the Alps. They're called the Grigna Mountains. They're called, and they're jagged peaks rising high into the sky. Very different from the soft, undulating hills of Tuscany. And it's absolutely true that Leonardo used those mountains as the model for his background of the Mona Lisa.
Really?
But the question is, why would he do that? Why would he do that? What did these mountains have to do with Mona Lisa? And our interpretation is that the Mona Lisa is no longer a portrait of a particular person, but the expression of the ideal mother. Again, he lost his mother when he was 5 years old, so all his life he's been trying to reach back to that mother ideal, and that's what the Mona Lisa represents. And so the background is sort of a Genesis-like symbol of the creative forces of nature, just as a woman carries the creative forces in her womb.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, if Mona Lisa is supposed to somehow represent his own mother, that might explain another theory that the likeness is similar to his own.
That's right. If you looked at his famous self-portrait, which he painted, almost a year before he died, so very, very late in his life, and you overlaid it to, which this film does, you can see the likeness. At the same time, though, we think that the Mona Lisa is actually the second version, that there is an earlier version of the Mona Lisa, which was in fact a portrait of a real woman, Lisa del Giocondo, the wife of a silk merchant in Florence, which he painted 10 years earlier in 1503. And believe it or not, but this painting, this earlier Mona Lisa, went on exhibit for the first time in a century in Florence last Friday. I was there, and big press conference, and that portrait was unveiled for the first time. And you can see how beautiful she was. So this is a young woman. She just gave birth, and I think that's why she really made an impact on Leonardo. And he says, I'm going to use her as a model for the ideal mother later on.
God and Adam, that painting, it was pointed out to me a long time ago that God is actually in what looks like to be the brain of a human, and the angels are kind of part of that whole brain. Is that an expression, like, was he kind of poking at the church, at belief? Was he expressing maybe a disbelief?
Well, of course, you're talking about the creation of Adam, which was painted by Michelangelo.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I mix them up.
No, that's okay. But it's a good question, because it goes back to the sense of what were these artists, what were they trying to do? And I agree that these were not just people who slapped some paint on a wall. I mean, these were thinkers, far more than we give them credit for today. Michelangelo read Latin. He wrote sonnets. He was an intellectual. And I think the suggestion that he was sort of imagining more than just a depiction of God and the angels has an interesting validity to it, because this is the time when anatomical studies were first performed. This is when people started to do dissections on corpses, as Leonardo himself did. So I think it's a very good thesis. I think there is something to it, yeah.
The book is called The Da Vinci Legacy, and I've come to realize that the book is about Da Vinci first and foremost, but about art in general, especially during that era, and how that influenced the rest of us, isn't it?
Absolutely. I teach at Field and Graduate University in Santa Barbara in a social studies program. And people say, well, what's a humanist and an art historian doing in a social sciences program? But I think that's how we have to look at art. Art is never produced in isolation, and especially in the Renaissance, art didn't wind up in museums. Art wound up to be used in people's homes, in churches, at civic events, civic institutions like City Hall. There was a purpose to these things. And we so often forget that, because we look at art in a museum in a sterile environment where it has lost its social and political context. And that's what we're trying to do with this book, to really restore the social and human context of why these things were created in the first place.
Do you know what I often think and wonder, and this I can't wait to hear from you, and I hope it's okay that I ask this question. We sort of kind of fascinated with the human body, with naked people, okay? And I wondered if back in those days, since there were no photographs, you couldn't have a Playboy magazine or something. I just wondered if the rich would say, you know what I'd like? I'd like a picture of a naked woman on my wall. Let me find somebody who can do that. And obviously a painter who could do that kind of thing would be needing the work. Is that why we see so many of them? What is it with, obviously it's a beautiful image, and I'm not taking away from that, but I wondered if it wasn't just, wealthy kings or whatever that said, you know what, we should have a naked woman on the wall.
Absolutely. I mean, the sexual impulse and eroticism was just as alive and well in the Renaissance as it is today. The problem is, of course, there was no Playboy magazine. So what you see is that until the 15th century, the church forbade the depiction of a nude man and woman, unless there was a biblical reason for it, such as the story of Adam and Eve, and only in Adam and Eve, tons of frescoes and paintings of that, do you see sort of an inkling, an interest in depicting the beauty of the human figure. But then comes the Renaissance, and all of a sudden, it's okay to depict scenes from Greek mythology and Roman mythology. And of course, we know the ancient Greeks, man, Zeus, he chased every skirt in the business. So that's when you see all of a sudden that this whole new repertoire of Greek goddesses and Greek gods come into the play, and now you see a whole bunch of paintings of Diana and Venus and Aphrodite and all these wonderful goddesses. And of course, you're absolutely right. The reason is because they'd like to look at a beautiful nude woman on the wall, and there it is.
Yeah, and sticking with that, I mean, obviously we have statues as well. Was Da Vinci a sculptor as well?
He did. I mean, we only know of a huge equestrian statue that he was working on in Milan. You only got as far as the horse, but it was supposedly the most beautiful depiction of a horse ever made. It wasn't clay. It was destroyed later on by the invading French. And I've just seen in Florence a terracotta sculpture of the Madonna, which they claim is the Leonardo da Vinci. I don't agree. I think it's a Sangallo. But he was certainly trained in sculpture at the studio of Verrocchio, yes.
Okay, now I made the mistake earlier of crediting him with the wrong painting. But did he enjoy painting? Wasn't it Michelangelo who actually would prefer to sculpt?
Yes, Michelangelo preferred to sculpt. And so he was actually quite upset when he got the project to paint the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, because he was working on the funeral monument of Pope Julius II and really had great ideas for his sketches, and he was working on it. And then the Pope yanked him off and said, hey, I need something on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which the Sistine Chapel is named after Pope Sixtus, who built that chapel. And he was very upset. So he went ahead and painted it, but certainly against his will. But of course, in the process, developed a whole new repertoire of depicting the human figure. And so that ceiling became a textbook for artists from throughout Europe, who would go there and sit for days in the chapel and sketch what Michelangelo had done. Leonardo was also a bit reluctant to paint. He wanted to understand science and anatomy and mathematics and the flow of water. And according to his story, I'm not sure if it's true or not. I don't think it is, but who knows? Vasari, his biographer, wrote that on his deathbed, Leonardo said, I only regret that I did not spend more time painting. And of course, many of his works remained unfinished. Mm-hmm. So, we of course know him today primarily as an artist, but certainly his inventions continue to fascinate us.
It sounds like, based on something you said earlier in the interview, that he was not revered. He was kind of left in a little hut when he died, and he wasn't celebrated until after his death.
That's right. I think he achieved his greatest fame in Milan with The Last Supper, and then he went back to Florence, and he was supposed to do another big fresco, which he never finished. Again, the paint was not right, and the paint started to run, and it was overpainted a few decades later. So there was really nothing to remind people of his great art. That's the big problem. There were no art books, there was no photography.
Right.
If you didn't have a big fresco like Michelangelo had, or like Raphael had, if you didn't have a big fresco somewhere, then people forgot about you.
Yeah. So I wonder why we don't see more duplicates, not by copycat artists, but by the same artist. Because the reason I'm saying that is because in today's world, for example, somebody sees a picture and say, "Oh, I want one of them," and we just make a copy of it. Back in those days, if somebody wanted a copy of it, you would have to literally paint the whole thing over again.
That's exactly right, and we talk about that very subject, that the Mona Lisa became famous because people were copying her for many, many years, well into the 17th century, because that's the only way you could see what it was about. It was different with the Last Supper. And that's where this first mass medium becomes so important, copper engraving, which is then integrated into a printed book. Because when copper engravers looked for an artwork that they could easily translate into a line drawing, they chose the Last Supper, because it's very monumental, there are not many details, and you can very easily capture it in a linear medium like the copper engraving. And we found that it was Last Supper was one of the first artworks to enjoy broad distribution throughout Europe. So that is where the fame of Leonardo was really kindled.
I have a copy of the book, The Da Vinci Legacy. You can get it on Amazon. It's got really good reviews. But the copy I have right now will go to one of you. If you want it, call me right now, 622-9622. I will pick one call at random, and it will be yours, and it'll be waiting for you here. So call right now. Do you have a website you'd like to direct us to?
Yes, if you would like to know more about it, just go to leonardobooks.com. It's one word, leonardobooks.com. And you'll find the trailer of the film that's currently airing on PBS stations about the book, and lots of stuff about Leonardo, links to other books, and beautiful pictures. So it should be a nice experience to browse through that site.
Let me give this one away. I have just a couple more questions. Good morning. You've got the book. Who's this?
Hi, thanks. This is Robin.
Robin, do you know where we are?
I do. Thank you.
You're welcome. It'll be waiting for you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. So do we have any reverence, I guess, for artists today? It seems like we've almost, I don't know, we have more reverence for movie makers. Let me put it that way. We don't have reverence for artists today, or am I wrong about that?
No, I think you're right about that. I mean, and it's probably because we sort of lost the sense of a cohesive movement. And I think that started in the 20th century after World War I, when people were so disillusioned by the terrible destruction of that great war that the traditional art that was painted just before then really lost its credibility. And that's when you see all these movements, these isms, surrealism and post-impressionism and Dadaism and the cohesiveness of the art world. And as a result, its relationship to society fell apart. And right now, unfortunately, modern art is very much the preserve of art collectors and art speculators.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be a real expert to know if, is this artist going to appreciate or not. And so the relationship between the man in the street or the woman in the street with an artist has been dissolved, and I think that's a really, really bad development. But you're absolutely right. We've sort of transferred that to another art form, which is filmmaking, and a celebrity of actors and directors, and there's nothing wrong with that. Mm-hmm. I hope that ultimately we'll find our way back to the visual arts and the expressive arts. But,
I do
I think we'll have to be patient.
If I can squeeze in one more, do you think we put too much religious meaning into some of Leonardo's paintings? If I could bring up another Leo, it's Leonard Cohen. I've often thought that the song he did called Hallelujah is completely misunderstood and completely being used for something that maybe, I don't know if he would approve of it or not, because he's gone now, but what do you think as far as the paintings of Leonardo da Vinci, though, in that regard?
Well, of course, the church remained a very important patron of the arts. And the reason is that in those days, people started to take worship in the home rather than in the church. So that's why you have all these Madonna paintings, because they were intended to be used in the home for a local prayer. But Leonardo went beyond that. He went beyond the religious meaning, and he really tried to understand the psyche, what he called the movements of the mind, and the psychology of his figures. And I think you're right. I think there is much more than we see on the surface.
Great conversation. Jean-Pierre Isbouts, thank you so much. The Da Vinci Legacy is the book. You'll find it on Amazon. And tell me your website again.
It's leonardobooks.com.
Easy enough. Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre.
Thank you, Larry, for having me.
You're welcome. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
Visit the Appleton Museum of Art for free on Saturday, July 6th from 10 a.m. till 5 p.m. All ages are invited to enjoy the special exhibitions, permanent collection, outdoor sculptures, and make art in the art space, all at no charge. The museum's education department will also host an open house so visitors can see the art studios, meet the teachers, and watch art-making demonstrations. Located at 4333 East Silver Springs Boulevard in Ocala. For more information, go to appletonmuseum.org.
In the good old summertime, it takes you back, doesn't it? Makes you think and remember. What did you do in the summertime when you were a kid? At Palm Garden of Ocala, we see folks who are young at heart, but their bodies are giving them a tough time. Our goal for every guest we serve is to bring them to their highest level of independence. Come visit us soon. We're located on the corner of Southwest 27th Avenue and 34th Street. And when you're in the hospital, ask for Palm Garden by name.
Are you a medical provider that doesn't like to settle for the same boring scrubs? Scrub Paradise in Ocala has a wide selection of top brand scrubs with embroidery available and the newest medical shoes and accessories. Every medical provider should look as great as the care they provide. Scrub Paradise is just off Easy Street next to Shoe Carnival in Ocala. Stop by today or give them a call at 352-873-4368. That's 352-873-4368.
Here is your 1-minute news brief. 2 motorcyclists have died in an accident on I-75 that involved a semi-tractor trailer at mile marker 343. A jury has found 57-year-old Jose Manuel Martinez guilty in 2 murders from 2006 in the Ocala National Forest. Self-driving vehicles with no humans on board will be able to operate in Florida once they're finally ready under a bill signed yesterday by Governor Ron DeSantis. A 32-year-old woman and former youth leader at a Pinellas County church has been charged with lewd and lascivious molestation of a 15-year-old girl. Marine researchers have finished a 10-day assessment of the iconic green sea turtle in the Florida Keys after discovering a herpes-like virus that affects turtles worldwide. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and his wife have placed flowers at